Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer and developer of Training for Optimal Balance. And with me is my good friend, co-host Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor, and your own business called Optimal Posture. So today we're going to look at, what did I call it? Allowing horses to break gait. So it's really
I
about
love that.
downward transitions. And I'm going to spell break gait, Brake, like the brakes in a car, rather than like breaking a dish. I think that's how we usually think of it.
Ah,
But what it really
okay.
means, spelling it as breaking gait, Brake, is because the downward transitions are related to what's called the braking mechanism in horses, which involves the use of the back muscles, the use of the spine in flexion rather than pushing down in extension, engagement of the pelvis, and there's even a braking and pushing phase of the leg strides. So
Right.
with every single stride, when the horses actually place the hind feet closer to the center of the body, which is what we consider engagement, that's where the braking phase of the stride begins. So if we want more engagement, it's not related to more pushing because that phase of the hind leg is when the leg is pushing off the ground behind the torso. So that's what generates propulsion. And then as the hind leg swings forward and lands towards the center of their body, that begins the braking phase, just like the brakes in our car. So that's how body weight and propulsion are stabilized. So we generate movement and stabilize movement with every single stride. And that relates to whether or not the pelvis is stable or unstable, engaged or disengaged, whether the back muscles are working equally or unequally. So in a horse, the entire what we call braking mechanism kind of goes from the withers all the way down to the hind hooves. It's a whole sort of chain that involves skeletal and muscular use. And it's supposed to work all the time, just like the brakes in a car, right? And sometimes our focus on faster equals better or faster,
Mm,
longer strides is how you lift the back. We end up focusing on the accelerator
right.
so much that we actually compromise the braking mechanism. So we wear out the brakes. And just like driving a car, it's a problem if your brakes don't work, and it's a problem if your accelerator doesn't work. So when we look at transitions, rhythmic movement, stride length, tempo, speed, power, agility, all of that is related to how the horse is balancing both the braking and pushing mechanisms overall. And like my ex-dressage horse, because the theory in dressage, and he went to pre-St. George level before I got him, that sort of wanting to see these huge, long, loose strides and fast speeds.
Wow.
Basically, when I got him, his brakes were shot. I had to rebuild the braking mechanism. And that's no small matter. It's taken years. And
Yeah, that what really shocked me is with this horse, because I've seen him, is he himself, that ab ability had, correct me if I'm wrong, but it had been taken away from him. He
that's
had
what
no
bad brakes look like. Like when you wear out the brakes and
he
you,
had because he had been trained in a certain way, and maybe you can explain it better, but he had no thought in his head on how to break himself, to
he
use his own
literally,
brakes.
so what the braking mechanism does is it's half of the equation for self-carriage, right? So
There we go.
you can't get self-carriage if the horse can't control the forward thrust that he's generating. That's what happened to my horse. He could thrust and generate propulsion, but he
Right.
couldn't manage his own internal body weight during movement, and he couldn't stabilize his body during movement. So that made him dependent on a leverage bit,
Heavily
somebody holding
leveraged.
him up. And
Right.
what it led to was navicular changes and ring bone by the time he was 10 years old.
Wow.
So his career was washed up. And I got him as a lame horse, right? And his x-rays have not really changed. The pathology is still there, but he's
Right.
100% sound now, walk, trot, and canter. But it's basically like I took a car that had no brakes and had to rebuild the whole braking system, not just replace the pads. It was like all the gears were broken, the whole mechanism of the brakes was just shot. And so
Right.
what happens in that case, and this is really encouraged because, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, is it drives us crazy when horses break gait, right? So maintain gait, maintain direction are like fundamental rules of all groundwork and riding. And I go, that's
Right.
how we get horses in this imbalance where either the accelerator doesn't work anymore, you got no forward. When you push on the gas pedal with a leg aid, you get right? Or can't get out of first gear.
I think what's really important, what you're saying to me is, are we helping or are we not?
Yeah, and that comes down to our understanding of horse
Right.
balance and horse bodies, which is really still pretty new compared to what we call classical training. I go, that dates back to the 1600s. What
Right.
we know now, like some of the best research was done in the 1900s, early 2000s for horses. And so we're just behind what we know scientifically about horses. It hasn't filtered into daily training application.
It's
So
kind
we
of like,
have,
yeah, it's kind of like in my world thinking with my teaching is I offer suggestions, but it's not a rule. It's
yeah, and I go,
that
how
kind of thing.
many,
It's like the innate knowledge within the body is there if we allow it to happen, even in a
yeah,
human.
well, the mechanism is in there, just like a car. I
Right,
go, the design of it is already there. But if we never change the oil, if we
right.
drive with our foot on the brake all the time, wherever we go, we can start wearing out the brakes. And what happens to horses, like how often or how many horses do you know where the owner is saying, my horse has no forward? And in my mind, I go, bad accelerator, right? Or my horse never slows down and just goes faster and faster and faster. And I go, bad brakes,
Right.
right? Because if the brakes are shot, and this happened to me when I was learning to drive a stick shift, the brakes in the car actually went out. And this is why I was addicted to stick shift manual transmissions after that because we sort of
Right,
made it home by downshifting, which is like
right.
a downward transition. And I realized when the brakes go out, you basically can use turns to slow down. You can downshift to slow down. And you can kind of just like, you can also speed up and use momentum. But if your brakes aren't working, that momentum might feel stable, but it's slightly out of control.
Control,
And
right.
that was how my horse moved when I got him. It's like the faster he would go, the more stable he would feel because his brakes were shot. So he would speed up and look for me to hold him up by the mouth.
That's it. Yeah. And I see that so much, or I see the don't let them transition down.
don't break gait, don't break direction,
Don't
don't
break
change
gait.
things. Yeah. It's like a cardinal
What?
sin against humans when horses break gait. And I go, but like when, let's look at it naturally. If your horse is hauling ass through the pasture,
Mhm.
right, and they feel unstable, they're either going to fall over and wipe out, or they're going to start slowing down and then make a downward transition. That is when the horse's idea is to slow down or go from canter to trot to walk to halt. That thought is what triggers the correct use of the entire braking system. So when we're like what happened to my horse was leaning on the bit. Hang on a second. Sorry. When leaning on the bit helped him stabilize while he was basically moving out of control, right? And if I
Right.
wanted a downward transition, I had to basically pull on the reins going against the horse's movement to help him make a downward transition. And to me, that's like throwing a car into reverse in order to slow down. I go, it's possible, but it's pretty hard on the engine, right? It's
Well,
hard on
if
the
you think about it,
mechanics.
working with people, I go to the the back brace for support.
Hmm.
It's like a false identity impression of what's really going on.
Yeah, like I think they can be helpful more than anything proprioceptively. I think
Right,
when
proprioceptively, yeah.
when you put a back brace on, it makes you more aware of how you're using that area. But if you wear one all the time,
Right,
that awareness goes away and you just
exactly.
become dependent on the brace. And that's kind of like resistance on the reins and the bit are part of sort of our braking aid to the horse
Right.
to say, could you use your braking mechanism? Right? But we tend to think of our rein and bit aids as either playing the role of stabilizing movement, right? So they don't
Mm,
have to ever use their brakes, or creating the downward transition, which means they don't have to use their own braking mechanism because we're just going to leverage that face until the feet stop. And so
right.
either way, we're not asking our horse to use the braking mechanism. We're bypassing it. And so over time, because it's a living body, the skeletal coordination is lost for braking and the muscles atrophy. And these are deep core muscles that are under the back muscles. The multifidus is more related to, it's a long muscle above the spine in the horse's back, and it's one of the primary muscles that they use for braking. And looking at some ultrasounds on different horses through rehab, horses that tend to not like to slow down, can't maintain halt, don't make easy downward transitions, horses with too much go,
Right.
that multifidus muscle is often severely atrophied.
And
And
it's
then
the same in people. It's the same. You can look at somebody that's lost all their spinal integrity of being vertical. Of course, horses are horizontal, but people being vertical,
depends on
that
that
is,
same muscle.
yeah, it's the same muscles, the multifidus and the rotatories that stabilize the spine in movement. They're very small, short muscles. And if we're not innately aware of good use, then they atrophy in people and they somebody ends up using a walker or a cane or, you know, something for support.
Yeah, and somebody asked me, I think this topic came up because somebody asked me, do I always allow a horse to break gait? And I said, pretty much, because
Mhm.
when the horses choose to break gait, whether it's from canter to trot, trot to walk, walk to halt, doesn't matter. When I allow it, because it was their idea, they're most likely going to start using the entire braking mechanism to do that. Even if it's weak and atrophied and poor, that's the beginning because it was their thought to slow down. I didn't ask for
That is so key because I've seen it with
it.
the horses that I've worked with for years now that you can see them thinking like, "Oh, well, falling on my face is not really a good idea. Let me halt." And it's so hard for the human to pause and enjoy that transition down to the halt and let them be there for a minute.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And if you think of it from the horse's perspective, if you start to feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or even unstable moving forward, then the most natural thing to do is slow down in order
right.
to regain your stability before you move further. And people do that too. I go, if we get a little unstable, we try to slow down like walking on ice. We're not going to go at normal speed.
And that's the central nervous system saying, hello, hello, things are not going right. You need to slow down, or in the Alexander world, we pause
Right.
and inhibit the next movement to say, wait a minute, I am not organized. I need to pause.
Yeah. And this is how really bad posture, dysfunctional skeletal coordination,
Mhm.
bad muscling, bad movement, how it sort of ends up getting labeled as a conformation issue is
Right.
because when we don't allow horses to break gait by choice, then we can stimulate them to not break gait, but their only option is to compensate in dysfunctional ways in order to regain stability after they lose it.
Yeah.
Where breaking gait and allowing the downward transition is more like a reset. Okay, we can try the speed again. Now that you're stable, let's try that faster speed or faster gait or even just going forward. Let's try that again and see if you can find more comfort, find more stability, get a little bit better at it. And so to me, the downward transitions are like the freaking gold nuggets of,
Yeah.
teaching horses better coordination, encouraging calmness and thoughtfulness, because that's the other thing is if they want to slow down, it's because they feel unstable, uncomfortable, or unsafe. And by allowing that choice of downward transition, you bring them back to feeling safe, stable, and comfortable. And then they can deal with a little bit of a challenge again.
It's a
But if
do-over. You get
it's
a
a do-over,
do-over.
and I go,
I love do-overs.
yeah. And I go, you know what? About 10,000 transitions later, they get better
They
each
get better at
transition.
it.
They
Allowing
learn.
them, like humans, to make their own mistake and reorganize. It just builds so much better biomechanically. The outcome is so much better.
Yeah, because I go, it's pretty simple. Once horses feel safe, the only other item on their menu is feeling comfortable. That's an instinctual need for people and horses. It's not optional. It's an
Right.
instinct, right? So, given a choice to, like, when I work with horses, actually, it's on the ground and riding, although the question came up about groundwork.
It
And I
did.
go, I don't care if I'm lunging or working at Liberty or working on the long reins or doing the decarpentry method or in-hand work, whatever I'm doing, I always allow at least a brief downward transition. So I look at it like it's my job to request the upward transition, but it's
Right.
my horse's job to choose the downward transition. And like with my horse, Rafalco, it would take 20 minutes of trot before he would choose to
He was
break gait.
scary.
Yeah, because he just didn't
He
know
was just
how.
scary. He didn't know how, poor guy.
But I go, he's not going to trot forever. He's eventually going to slow himself down. And in that process, he had to figure it out. And he wasn't doing anything that was going to harm him. So it was like, trot away, canter if you want. And when you're ready to slow down, you figure it out.
Right.
And a lot of times when I see people in groundwork giving voice commands or using ropes or whips in order to make the ask for a downward transition, it cuts the movement. And so,
It's so not natural. You know what I mean? You can just see the chain reaction difference than if you just let them do it themselves.
yeah. And even
Yeah.
when I'm writing, it's like if I allow the downward transition, it has the same effect. Return to safety, return to comfort, return to stability, and then we'll try it again. And so, like on a young horse, I don't like even their first ride under saddle. If they take two steps from a leg aid and then stop, I'm happy. And then I repeat, right? And then eventually, when we get into upper levels of riding, the ever mysterious half halt, I go, that's just like tapping the brakes. Like it's so simple. Once you understand the braking and pushing mechanism, you go, it's just like we use our brakes in our car. We don't always use them the same way
Or we
because it,
don't slam on them when we come to a stop sign. It's
right,
a gradual thought.
right.
It's an actual relationship with the sign, you know? It's like, "Oh yeah, I better start slowing down."
Yes, yes. And when we do slam on the brakes, we get to feel the law of inertia, right?
Yeah,
And
it's all physics, right?
it's all physics.
It's all
And when we,
physics.
most of us who can drive a horse trailer, we learn very quickly how to apply the brakes in order to keep our horses stable in the trailer,
Right.
right? So that we're not pitching our horse all over the trailer and they never want to get back in. So
This
we
is
learn
true.
how to use turns, right? We use a turn
Hmm.
to slow down. We learn how to apply the brakes in order to stabilize the propulsion of the truck and trailer. That's the exact same use inside the body. It's the same purpose is to stabilize movement, avoid those big whiplash moments of inertia, and sort of gradually increase and decrease or increase and stabilize propulsion.
Right.
So it's sort of this fixation on faster equals better in some of the horse sports, or the other fixation of slower equals better in other horse sports. I go, an imbalance between the brakes and the accelerator is always going to be a problem.
Right.
And the only way to develop rhythmic movement, like I don't really care at all about stride length, tracking up,
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
speed, all of that.
Yeah.
I go, none of that indicates balance to me. What indicates balance is a steady rhythm that is equal parts go and woe, or equal parts self-propelled and self-controlled by our horse, which means our leg aids are lighter, our reins are lighter,
Hmm.
everything's lighter because that's an essential component of self-carriage in horses and people. Like you said, I think you always use the example of people leaning on a walker. They've
Yeah.
lost self-carriage
They have totally lost self-carriage, and it's a central nervous system
issue.
thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, this is not just postural looking at it is an innate central nervous system red flashing light, and same with horses. I mean, they're gonna spook, buck, whatever when they're not getting closer to balance, or like you said, the learning frame of mind.
Yeah, and I work really hard to make biomechanics in horses simple to understand. But I
Hmm.
go, you can't make it simpler than it is. And
Well, that's
it,
true.
and it's like if you don't understand a braking mechanism in a horse and a pushing mechanism, and it's a whole chain of bone and soft tissue coordination,
Right.
then just forcing the legs to go deeper under the body could crash the system. I go because the body will compensate, not necessarily do it the way you think it's going to have to happen. I go, it's way too complex for that. You can't
Right.
just encourage tracking up or use a whip to tap the legs underneath and think you're going to
Mhm.
really get the correct use of the braking mechanism. I go, it's too complicated for that simplistic kind of cues or anything like that.
It it's like in our world, you cannot mechanically have good movement. Does that make sense?
Well, you
It
can't make it happen in another body. Like I go,
exactly.
there
Exactly.
is the sink or swim theory for teaching people how to swim,
That's true.
right? I go, it's a pretty dangerous learning curve.
Yeah.
A percentage of people learn to swim that way, but it's stress inducing and it's potentially life-threatening, right? So now we don't do that as often. We teach
Right.
kids how to swim more systematically because it's safer and it always helps them learn how to swim. But at the end of the day, whether we help with water wings or styrofoam boards or kiddie pools,
Mhm.
that kid has to learn to swim by discovering that
Yes,
coordination.
their own self-organization of how it works.
Yeah, they can't swim until they can swim.
Right.
And we're sort of still using the sink and swim method of teaching horses how to move correctly. And I go, it's
Right.
very sink or swim. So there's really a lot of lameness, behavioral issues, stressful side effects that are
Yeah,
not working.
ulcers,
Yeah.
that, yeah, all
And
sorts of
what I
things
call
can happen.
basic balance is just a minimal of a coordination in horses that sustains health and soundness. I go, that's why it's important to me. I go, the performance, like improving athletic abilities and performance is kind of the side effect. Because I used to
Well,
think
yeah.
it
Hmm.
was only important to know about horse balance if I was going to compete. Right. So I hear all the time, I'm just a trail rider. I don't need to know this stuff. And I go,
Oh,
well, your horse is weight bearing and your horse has a body, and you're either taking good care of your car or you're not. And
right.
so, you
And
know,
how are you influencing that as the rider?
right.
It's like we say, it's pure physics. If you're not neutral in the situation, then you're probably not helping.
Yeah. Like even if I have kind of a crappy car that I only drive to and from work every day,
Mhm.
if the brakes don't work, it's a big problem and I need to get that repaired, whether I fix it myself or I take it to a repair shop. It's going to get fixed because otherwise it's very unsafe and not fun to drive anymore. And the same
Right,
thing if the accelerator doesn't work, that's no fun,
right.
right?
But they
So,
kind of go hand in hand with the horse.
well, even the car.
Yeah,
It's like if you have a sticky accelerator that doesn't generate forward movement, you would fix the accelerator system. You would find
right,
out what's wrong between the pedal and the gears and the engine. Why is it when I push on the accelerator, I can't get out of first gear? That means there's a mechanical problem.
I love that you ask the why because I don't think we do that in the horse world.
No,
We're
we
not
just call him
stopping to
naughty.
ask what naughty. We're not
Yeah,
asking the why. Why is this the way it is?
right.
Yeah,
Because I go, a horse that loses forward, like people call him lazy, rebellious, wayward, stubborn, whatever, all these things. And that question crossed my mind. I go, why would a creature
hmm,
that God or the universe designed for movement lose the desire to move? Why, right? Like, why can that happen? And the short answer is because movement is no longer comfortable. That's the
right.
same reason we quit moving.
I think we had a conversation, I can't remember when, maybe it was yesterday, about wild horses. I mean, because they have to have the braking and pushing down and transitions pretty well. I mean, they don't spend a lot of time. They don't have a watch that says, "Okay, I'm going to canter for 5 minutes
I know, right?
and then don't forget my trot circles." And
Right. And if you look at Mustangs and wild horses, they're beautifully developed. They have beautiful musculature. They're very athletic, very agile, and have a healthy system, or nature weeded them out. They
That's
didn't
right.
survive.
Right.
So the genetics are better, number one, because they're self-selected. And I go, none of our horses are ever going to discover how to best use their own bodies because we provide food and water. We've taken
Good
away the
point.
need for them to move on a regular basis. Even if we put them in a herd of 30 with a paddock paradise system and, you know, it's like there's either grass or hay there, or they're going to get it soon. And
Right.
they know where the water trough is. So, and it's always there and it's always full. So I go,
And
they,
it's the same for people. Look at the lack of movement we have these days with all our devices and everything. Um,
right.
and it's the same problem.
Yeah,
Because if you're gonna go for a walk and you start to get fatigued, you're gonna start questioning how you're walking.
right. So people sometimes won't walk long enough or regularly enough
Good point.
to find a more comfortable coordination. The coordination is what it is. It's fixed as a habit. It's what we call muscle
Mm,
memory. And we don't often even think it's something that can change. That's your work,
that's
right?
my work.
And that's also my work is that, yeah, those ingrained habits of movement can change and we develop them during life. Like,
Right.
we once had to learn how to walk
Mhm.
and we had to learn how to ride a bike and swim and ride a horse. Like those were all learned coordinations. So anything we learn can also be learned differently.
Right.
And the same thing with horses. It is not a natural thing. Every young horse has to learn how to move with a saddle and bridle, has to learn how to carry a rider. And this sort of 30, 60, 90 days walk, trot, canter deal, I don't think it's like the horse goes, okay, I'll do it. I'll stay out of trouble. And I
Yeah.
kind of feel okay. But that's like the nucleus of where those dysfunctional habits and poor
Good
movement
point.
are going to take
Good point.
hold is in
Right.
that early introduction of here's how you carry a rider. You're either going to teach them how to do it in what we would consider mechanically safe coordination or dysfunctional coordination. If
And
and
that's
if
a great point because are we satisfying ourselves? Or are we really taking into consideration the well-being of the horse?
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
where that don't change gait and don't break gait and don't change
Don't break.
direction. That's where it
Right.
starts.
Right.
Like
It's a
the
safety mechanism for the human.
makes us feel better if they're obedient. Yeah.
Oh, is that thing?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
feel safer if our horse doesn't give us too much trouble.
Doesn't have a say in the matter?
Yeah. But that's right where that initial thought from the horse's earliest training, that it's a big deal if I break gait, I get punished, or I get
Yeah.
whipped, or I get yelled at, right? Or I get a constant aid that's always telling me don't break gait,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And if I try to change direction, I also get in trouble.
Right.
So if I'm uncomfortable, I just got to figure this out for myself. I'm on my own, right? And so they do figure it out. But it's like the side effect of the amount of behavioral issues we have or health issues as a result of
Right.
stress, or we never realize that horse's true talent, right?
That's a good
Because
point
we're just
because we're,
sort of
yeah,
using up their youthful energy without really putting skill development in the mix.
for longevity. I mean, it's allowing them to transition and use their body correctly creates longevity in people and in horses.
Yeah, and really the best, easiest way to strengthen the braking mechanism is just let your horse know it's okay to make a downward transition when they choose to. Don't fight it. Don't yell at them.
Just be
It's no
ready.
big deal. And you know what? You don't have to allow it for 15 minutes. You can allow it for two strides and then
Right.
repeat the aid to make another upward transition. I go, it's
Yeah.
not going to hurt anybody. And it's like people get afraid that if they allow that in training, the horse is going to do it in a show. And
I think you're right.
I go, no, because once the horse's balance is good enough to show, they no longer need to break gait. And what happens is they just don't.
And that's interesting that I think what was real important to me that you said is they are ready to show.
Well, there's that.
There's that. That's another
Well, there's that.
podcast.
Yeah. Uh, that's a different podcast. Yeah.
When do we think they're ready, or does the horse think they're ready? That could be two separate things.
Yeah. And what I consider essential healthy coordination is something I call basic balance. And I go, if we don't know what that means regarding the braking, the pushing mechanisms, the straightness and stability of the axial skeleton, then we're maybe going to the shows a little premature, and we're not really building the athletic capacity of our horses to show. And I do
Right,
see that all the time. But if,
right,
like, what the show is supposed to be, or any competition, is kind of supposed to show off what you did at home.
right,
And a lot of people go to shows because they want it as a training experience. And I go, that's fine too. Get your horse used to things. Don't
right,
expect to win. And don't be disappointed if you don't. If you're doing it for that reason, then do it for that reason and don't worry about your score, right?
right.
But if you're going there to try to win, my question is your horse athletically prepared
Mhm.
to do this more with guidance than keeping the balance for our horse, right?
Yeah,
Because we are busier than a one-legged man in a butt kicking contest trying to balance our horse
we
and
think.
do the test or and
Right,
do the course, right? And we think we have to do both all the time. And I go, no, the whole idea of balance and self-carriage is so that when you do your competition, you can focus on your stride count or where you need to turn or what you need to do next, and your horse is mostly maintaining balance on their own. But if you're having to maintain your horse's balance and do the
and
competition,
add another stimulus. Yeah,
I go, that's a lot. That's,
yeah.
that's a lot. So a little more preparation at home makes competing a whole lot more enjoyable. And you get better at it.
And I think since we both come from a competitive background, that it's so difficult when to allow the horse to have a say in their day. Allow the horse to have a transition and us listen to that.
Yeah.
So, oh, you need a downward transition. Okay, what do I need to look at?
Yeah.
Why does that need to happen? Instead of that human Jack Russell type A response of keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Guilty. Yeah.
Guilty.
Yeah, so
It is so humbling. It's
if we
so humbling.
circle it back to this whole braking mechanism and allowing our horse to break gait, it's kind of like if we're always giving those leg aids in our daily ride and never allowing the horse a downward transition, we're kind of wearing out the brakes all the time. And then if you sort of compare going to a competition, like having a drive through the Rocky Mountains, all of a sudden bad brakes make a much bigger difference in a situation where you need the
Mhm.
brakes more. So we might be getting around Kansas with bad brakes, but we're going to go take a drive in the Rockies. It's going to be a whole different deal with those same brakes that are a little bit compromised. And so when we're constantly pushing our horse to go forward, or we're constantly holding our horse up or holding our horse back from going too fast, we're basically weakening and deteriorating the accelerator and the brake. mechanically.
Right. That just basically, and not, it's kind of, if you did that for humans, they would have, like you said, no self-carriage, no ability to carry themselves or walk or do anything without help.
Right. Right. And we can go there. Like we can get that way. We
Yeah.
usually call it aging, but it's not, it's,
No such thing in my book.
I know, doesn't have to be that way.
Doesn't happen to me.
Yeah. But no, just allowing horses to break gait. And I find when the coordination is really bad, like because I work in rehab all the time. So I've got behavioral issues, I've got lameness issues, I've got big performance issues that we're trying to turn around. And just allowing horses to break gait and not get in trouble and repeat the upward transition has such a calming effect. Like,
It
so
does.
it helps overcome behavioral issues because the horse has a chance to feel safe and stable, at least briefly, right? And then as the balance improves, as the coordination improves and the horse regains a sense of safety and trust, they always maintain gait voluntarily
Right.
for like longer and longer and longer periods of time in better movement because they can.
And better organ, yeah,
I
because
go,
they have been allowed, just like people, the inner ability to find it.
right. And it's a
Right.
self-discovery thing.
It's a self-discovery.
I can't make a horse do it. I can guide, I can use
Mhm.
water wings, but I can't make them learn how to swim. I go,
It, it's it's the same thing with my work. I can't position somebody for success, you know what I mean? For
you
using
can't
their body.
put
I
them in a
can't go,
posture.
okay, if you
Yeah.
do this, you're good.
And that's what we do to riders,
And
right?
we do. We
Yeah.
tell them it's a, yeah,
We tell them
but
it's a posture and
it's a
here,
place. We think
I'm
it's a
gonna
place.
I'm gonna come pull your heels down, shorten your stirrups. I'm gonna give you a shoulders back
Oh, I
brace,
love those new things.
right?
Yeah, I want one.
And we're gonna put, I don't know, a piece of tape under your chin and
Yeah,
all these things so that you don't change position. Now hold it,
just
right?
stay there.
Just stay there, even
Yeah,
though the forces of motion are like a river that you're trying to kind of stay stable
exactly.
on. We think we
And
can't
your inner
adjust.
self is going, "What the F is what?
What? Why can't I do this? I'm no good.
Wait a minute, this doesn't feel right."
Yeah.
That's what the horse is going through.
Yeah. And what I see with people, like you always talk about people who have to use a walker just to be mobile, that to me is no different than my ex dressage horse that needed the bit in order to stabilize movement.
I totally agree with you
I
on
go,
that one.
that bit became a horse's walker.
Yep,
And and it's like a person with a walker has also weakened the braking system of their body. So what the walker does is help stabilize the motion or the bit or the side reins or the draw reins or the
right,
martingale or the tie down, right? All of those tools we use to frame the head and neck on a horse
right.
is really like giving the horse a walker and going, you don't have to use your brakes anymore. So the
You don't
horse
have to
is
think. You don't have to do anything.
right, just lean on this and you'll be okay.
You'll be fine.
And that's what destroys and continually atrophies the internal braking mechanism. And it's the same with people. They can't function without the walker at a certain point unless they actively restore their braking mechanism,
Exactly.
because otherwise we would fall over. That's why they're using the walker. So that kind of, it
And all
happens to
those thoughts
horses.
come up. You know, the fear comes up, the fear of falling comes up. And, I can
Yeah. You don't feel safe in your own
imagine a
skin.
horse is going to, no, no, you
Yeah.
don't.
So imagine if you
You
don't feel safe in your own skin, you don't want to do as much, number one. And
hmm
so horses get labeled as lazy because they just don't want to do as much because it's not easy or comfortable. Or you're scared all the time. That's the
right.
horses with anxiety, hypersensitivity to
hmm
the environment, all of that. It's like, yeah,
Spooking.
because if you don't feel safe and comfortable, you're going to have problems.
Yep.
And I don't think people understand easily what that means for horses to feel safe and comfortable. And to me, comfortable is a mechanically efficient coordination.
Mhm.
That's the only way you get a sense of internal comfort is if you learn how to use the mechanics that we already have. I
Exactly.
go, the body is what it is, whether it's a human body or a horse body. And I go, all cars that are mechanically sound drive well. It doesn't matter if it's the family station wagon, if it's a stick shift or an
Right.
automatic, if it's a sports car or a truck, the brakes still work the same way. The gas
Right.
pedal still works the same way. The steering wheel still works the same way. And so that's kind of how we need to look at horse balance or horse coordination. So I go, the steering is broken, right? Or the brakes are shot, or the accelerator isn't working. We're not getting out of first gear, right? So we try to make that up by sort of pushing the car along.
Right.
But I go, we never jump
Force it.
start the
We'll
body.
force it.
Yeah. And as hard as we try, it's like the body never kind of jump starts, or
Mhm.
we push it hard enough, it rolls out of control. I go,
Right.
it's like one of those two things. And so bodies have a mechanical design. I go, it's not an opinion. It's just we either learn how to
It's
work with it or we fight against it.
right.
Yeah. And that's where our problems come from. So I think we better wrap it up. Hmm? Any
Okay.
anything you want to add on people about downward transitions or braking?
It's an innate level of organization within all of us, all bodies. If we just listen to it, it's there.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think how I end up explaining it to people kind of in the simplest terms is like if you take somebody 50 or older and a kid that's 15 years or younger, and you ask them both to go walk down a steep hill, I go, typically the kids are going to go faster and faster, run down the hill, and sort
Mhm.
of use the force of momentum. So they're never really in control, but the
Right.
faster they go, the less likely they are to fall over, unless they
Right.
trip, and then it's a big wreck. I go, that's too much acceleration compared to brakes, right? And then there's the person over 50 going down the same hill. They tend to lean backwards and take little tiny baby
Mhm.
steps and slow way down, right? I go,
Mhm.
that's them sort of pumping the brakes and not really using the accelerator.
Right.
And when people ask me about hill work, if we look at it from a physics perspective, the hill, the downward slope of the hill does two things. If we're going down the hill, like I just described, the hill itself is adding to acceleration, propulsion, right? So the hill itself pushes. So resisting that takes even more braking
Mhm.
force, right? Or use of the body to resist that force of acceleration just from the hill itself. And when we go up the hill is braking. So we have to use more pushing to go up the hill. And so that's why if you're just sending your horse on hill work and the horse is dysfunctional, I go, you could make the problem worse
Right.
because they already have an issue with braking or pushing, or maybe they'll figure it out before they get injured or fall over. I go,
Right.
maybe they will, right? Because the hill itself taps into using a little bit more of the natural braking system or a little bit more of the natural pushing system. And the
Or
problem is for every hill you go down, you got to go back up. And so
well,
I
and
go,
that might be why some horses stop and won't do it because they can't think of an
how to do it.
organization of how to do it and be safe.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so when we push them or increase the stress level,
Mhm.
the hill work loses all benefit.
I totally agree with you.
If we let them think their way through it up and downhill and make as many downward transitions as they want, like a little pause, even if it's walk halt, I go, then it might actually help them kind of discover how to use their braking mechanism or their pushing mechanism. So it could be beneficial. But that whole deal, that's why it's titled, allowing our horse to break gait. What? What?
What?
Who is this crazy
What?
trainer and what the heck is she talking about? Yeah, because breaking gait, it just drives us up a wall. Like,
It's a human predatory thing, I think.
yeah, and sometimes when I tell new clients to allow their horse to break gait, I go, that kind of breaks their
That tells you where
relationship
you're
with
going
me.
from there on.
They go, you're nuts. I'm not going to let my horse break gait. I've got competitions to do.
Right.
And I go, okay, good luck. But yeah, I think allowing our horse to break gait is just so, so, so important.
Yes.
So important. Oh, and I totally forgot one last note. Where did I put it? I will put in the show notes for this podcast or in the about section under the YouTube video the horse fair that is coming up.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I
please
completely
do.
forgot to mention it. So I'm
You
going to
worked
be,
so hard on that and it's
I
really good.
did, I
You
did.
did it. It's really good. Everybody needs to hear it,
So
see
the
it.
horse fair is February 22nd and 23rd of 2025, coming up soon. It's called the Art of the Horseman online horse fair. And I'll put a link to free
Yay.
tickets in the description box and show notes, and a link for information about the show if you guys want to join. And everything's online. So you don't have to go anywhere, especially in February when it's freezing cold.
No
And
kidding.
at least in the northern hemisphere is freezing cold.
Mm.
And so hopefully you can join us for that. It would be great. I put together 4 different video presentations,
Well
and
done.
yeah, it was kind of intense. That's why I got
Yeah, it
behind on the
was.
podcast. So I meant to say that at the beginning, but I got carried away with the breaking. So thanks everybody for joining us. I think we'll wrap it up there unless you have anything to add.
That's good.
That's good. All right. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to more horsey talk on the next episode.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.